So here's our agenda for the session today. I'll go through a couple of quick slides to talk about why we develop server management and the value that it's going to bring. We'll go through a series of demos so you see the different components in action. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the session today hands-on. So you're going to go through the content migration tool and the resource monitoring tool together. Before we actually get into that, just want to talk about what the different components of server management are. I mentioned the resource monitoring and the content migration. I'll discuss each of those in depth momentarily, but I did want to call out another component, and that is the AWS or external integrations. So if your Tableau server is run inside of the AWS environment, you have a couple of additional options at your disposal. Number one, you could be able to use the RDS Postgres instead of the native Postgres database that ships with Tableau server. And that's so that you could take advantage of greater high availability in the sense that the RDS gives you multi-availability zone HA as opposed to just the HA that that Tableau server would be configured with. Also with encryption at rest for extracts, within AWS, you can leverage KMS options for tighter security around those encrypted extracts. We're not going to get specifically into this particular aspect of server management today because A, there's really nothing hands-on to do with it, and B, not everyone leverages AWS within their server environment, so we want to focus on the other two components, which are the RMT and the CMT. So for the resource monitoring tool, it's essentially going to allow you to have broad system level monitoring as well as the ability to do in-depth performance investigations into the behavior of Tableau server. So there's a lightweight agent that sits on each node of your Tableau server, and it captures physical machine information like CPU, RAM utilization, I/O, as well as all the information that's generated inside of the Tableau server logs. And so that way you can mirror those two or match those two up together to gather insights in a web UI in near real time. And then the content migration tool is something to help you migrate objects, meaning workbooks and data sources, from a source to a destination. So this is most common for moving those workbooks and data sources from project A to project B, or site A to site B, or even server A to server B. And so a couple use cases that come to mind for this are being able to sync content between North America and EMEA, for example, if you've got kind of a global approach to your Tableau server. And then also being able to move content through the development lifecycle as it goes from a testing phase to a to production ready state for your users. And before we take a deeper look, it's important to call out that server management provides value for many folks, not just a few. Certainly it's designed for our administrators, our infrastructure teams, our DevOps, and those folks will likely reap the most benefit directly. But it's good to note that many of the stakeholders all the way downstream capitalize on the impact as well. So let's go into detail on the resource monitoring tool. So how do things work today? Well, you've probably got a built-in system monitoring tool or system monitoring built into the operating system. So whether it be Windows or Linux, you can use things like perfmon or something to the of that equivalent to keep an eye on general hardware utilization. So your CPU, your disk, your network, your I/O, and at the same time, Tableau Server ships with its own set of insights in the form of administrator views and the ability to utilize or even configure your own custom admin views. And that's for application monitoring. But they're separate and distinct. And so there's very little overlap, if any. And so when it comes down to trying to triage or identify if a particular spike in activity or workload times, how that actually impacts or what that's doing to the underlying hardware, it's very difficult to combine that and get that answer. Usually you got to spend some time in potentially Tableau desktop to join those two sources together. You may have to go through the process of creating your own admin views. You may have to rely on the expertise of your Tableau account team. So you're spending a lot of time just in that forensic process. And that time may sometimes take months. And in the event that you actually do ultimately come to an answer, A, it's going to be too late to take action on that because it's too far down the road. And B, it's not really reusable. So if you have to go back and do this process again to get another insight later on for something that's unrelated, you're going to again spend that same forensic time going through to construct the views that you need, and you'll still end up with an answer too late. So what the RMT does is it consolidates all that information onto one view in near real time so you can start to identify where those overlaps actually occur. So this is kind of the home screen within the resource monitoring tool. We start to see certain characteristics about the hardware and from the performance standpoint, and then also see how it coincides with view load times or user activity. And there are certainly dozens of potential questions that are otherwise challenging to answer. Here are just a few. One of them could be getting a sense of how my environments, the associated servers and processors are performing over time. What does that trend look like? Are there specific sessions or kind of rogue queries that all of a sudden are impacting the overall performance of the machine or utilizing more hardware than we would expect? Obviously, as your environment is dynamic, you're gonna have to go through Tableau server upgrades. You're gonna potentially expand the hardware footprint. Perhaps you've developed a new, somewhat complex report. How do we monitor those event changes to see if things have improved or gotten worse from utilization standpoint? Um, are we able to stay ahead of incidents by being able to be alerted when something negative or perceived as negative takes place on the server? If we've got a session that gets hung, if we've got a report that takes too long to load for a key user, let's find out about that immediately and be able to take action. Can we can we easily identify which machines might need either tuning or some additional resources? Perhaps you've noticed that on your backgrounder node that all of a sudden we're starting to get maxed out in terms of RAM consistently. Well, that might be something that historically was challenging to accomplish. Now we can do that very easily using the RMT. Um, are we able to attribute negative performance, to either just a significant volume of user activity, or is it more related to a poorly designed workbook? Because basically that answer can lead you down one of two paths that are vastly different in terms of a solution. And ultimately, can we provide better insights for the administrators of the sites so that they can get a sense of what's going on within their site and take appropriate action based off of the findings? So let's take a quick look. So as I mentioned before, this is a browser-based interface. And I'll just log in as the system administrator. And this is our landing page. So this is basically just what we call the performance environment card. Excuse me, the environment performance card. And I see some very high-level key measures, specifically around CPU utilization and also just the user activity on the system. And I've also got a quick identifier that shows me the number of incidents that may exist on things that we're trying to stay ahead of. So I see the list of incidents there. We'll come back to this momentarily, but for now I'm going to drill into this environment performance card. And when I do that, I'm immediately brought to that consolidated view that shows me what's going on with the hardware in the form of my processors, my memory, disk, and network, along with what's actually going on inside the application, specifically around what the concurrent usage looks like, any sort of negative load times if things are spiking down here. And on top of that is you see that as I mouse over one view or another, it's basically going to show me how that particular activity is affecting the other areas. So as you see here that I mouse over inside the load times, based on where I'm at, I can see the concurrent usage kind of highlighted there in the background, and same with the background tasks, the performance, the Tableau processes. And then as I make a selection, let's say I want to understand what's going on with this spike in load times. Now what that's doing is it's navigating me um, to the activity tab. As you see here, we've got activity, which is composed of the VizQL sessions, background or tasks, data queries, view loads, and slowest views. And again, I see those on the available tabs here as well. But basically, that time frame that I selected in the initial view load times area, this is now showing me the VizQL sessions that comprise that particular time frame. And this will show me the various workbooks, the user and the session ID, if there are a high number of requests within that workbook, which could be an indicator of poorly designed workbook structure. But let's drill into the session ID, and this is where, again, I can start to do that forensics and identify root cause based off of the drill down. And so now this is showing me the summary of this particular VizQL session in terms of duration and in addition to the average time and the max time that it's done, so I can start to see if there's a significant delta there. I can also see the requests themselves listed out, along with any associated data queries, incidents, and ultimately the environmental activity as well. So again, this is how we're actually tying those two views, the system activity and the application activity together. Finally, let's get into the configuration within the admin interface. And if I go over to our incidents, this is where I can start to be proactive. I can say that, hey, look, if I've got certain users that I think are critical, I want to make sure that I'm aware of any time they have load times of a certain threshold. And I could set that up very easily. And that type of alerting could be done across any key measure, not just slow views, but slow queries, also basic hardware properties around memory utilization, disk space, CPU usage, and, and the like. So this is a great area for us to set up those conditional alerts so that we're ahead of that instead of reacting to anything that might be perceived as negative later on. Obviously, you get to spend a lot more time with the resource monitoring tool in the exercises. So we'll be able to dive deeper into that shortly. But for now, what I'd like to do is just talk about the content migration tool. And as I mentioned before, as content changes, as it often does, usually it's going to need to go through some sort of approval process and ultimately changed in some way, whether it be change in terms of a landing location, again going from a dev to a prod environment. It might go through some sort of modification of properties around metadata, or even just the structure of the workbook itself. And so historically, moving that content or changing it from an initial state to a desired state can be a very cumbersome process. It could require some manual activity in terms of republishing, utilizing Tableau Desktop. It could be setting up REST API scripts or tab command scripts, which again are certainly take time to develop and to build. And so essentially what this tool does is it allows for a more streamlined approach to do that, and without having to require those advanced skill sets. So here's kind of a quick snapshot of really what it could look like. And so on the left-hand side, you would select your source and your destination. And those, again, those could either be specific projects, sites, or servers. You're going to determine what content specifically, what workbooks, what data sources, and that could be done manually. That could be done based off of a condition. And then you'll determine ultimately what you'd like to change. And that could be in the form of user permissions. That could be in the form of destination of a different project within the Tableau server. It could even be updates to the workbooks themselves in the form of changing an action URL, changing tooltips, perhaps that we've got references to a test environment when when the workbook was initially designed, and now that it's going through this promotion cycle, we want to change those references to the production information. And that can certainly take the form of a database connection as well. It's certainly common to develop your workbooks against a test database, which might have a smaller amount of data in it. Um, but ultimately, once we've approved the structure of the workbook, we want it to automatically point to the production database instead of that test database. So from a solution standpoint, what this is doing is it's streamlining things in the form of um, the promotion process by adhering to kind of the segregation of duties between DevOps and the rest of the team. There's no need for Tableau desktop skills. There's no need for those deployment scripts to be built utilizing code or anything like that. From a tracking standpoint or an auditability standpoint, more and more companies are mandating increased scrutiny or trying to enforce increased scrutiny so that tracking is fully changed. And by being able to save these CMT scripts, you've actually got something that's easy to interpret and fully auditable. As far as bulk updates, I mentioned how you can certainly combine all these steps of changing a workbook kind of all the way through. Again, if it's changing images, if it's changing reference paths, if it's changing databases, you can do that in bulk just through a single content migration plan. And you don't have to get into XML hacking in terms of the workbook itself or going through that manual effort. And then finally, as your environment may change, which again is pretty much a constant, you might go from a Windows to a Linux environment. You might go from one version of Tableau Server to another. You might go from an on-premise Tableau server to a cloud server. As you go through those migrations, the content migration tool is a great way to streamline that. So therefore, those efforts are not as expensive or time-consuming. So let's take a look. So before we actually get into the tool itself, I just want to show you, here's an example piece of content that we're going to migrate. So this monthly review dashboard, a couple things kind of jump off the bat that would indicate that this is a development dashboard, right? It's got the beta image right there. And if you look closely within the data, you see that we've got test furniture, test office supplies, test technology, and then blanket customer numbers. So this is actually a test database, right? If we have 50 million rows of data in our database, and I'm just looking for dummy data to build out this workbook to make sure that the usability is there for our end users, it'd be certainly fine to go against a couple hundred rows of data in a test database just for the sake of building. And so now that we've completed this process of building it, perhaps we want to swap this database out to point to the actual production data. And then finally, I've got a toggle between this map and the bubble chart. And let's say that we want it to automatically default to the map view once this content has been approved and published over to our production site. Well, within the production site, let's see here, let's just browse through the folder structure. You see that we've got a default and a couple different folders. What I'm going to do is, I don't know why we have dev here inside of the Superstore prod, so we're going to ignore that for now. But what I'd like to do is make sure that when we get into, when we publish up the content of production, I want to have its own separate folder structure, and of course I want to make those 3 changes to the workbook. So let me bring in the content migration tool. And I'm going to browse for a plan that I've already saved and set up. And if you notice down the left-hand side, this is just kind of telling us the different steps that we're going to go through. Right now we're on servers where I pick my source and pick my target. It happens to be the same Tableau server machine, except where our source is our dev site and our target, or our destination, is our prod site. And then we're specifying that we want to look in all projects instead of manually chosen projects. And in this case, I'm actually choosing that monthly review by name. But again, we'll get into a rule-based approach momentarily. And this is where I'm going to change that project so that it specifically creates the project sales dashboard dash prod RIL. Those are my initials. So I wanted to specifically have it placed inside of that RIL project area. Here's where we're specifying that we want to replace that image. You may recall that we have the beta image, and what I'd like to do is swap that out. So we strip out the beta image, and then I've got an image that specifies certified that lives on my laptop, and I want to take that image and populate it in its place. And then I mentioned before the toggle between the map and the bubble chart. Again, I want to set it up so that by default it's going to bring up the map view instead of the bubble, and all we're doing is specifying the parameter name of show view as and specifying the value for map. Now this data source area, this is specifically applying to any embedded data sources within the workbook, and we're not actually using an embedded data source here, so we'll skip through here. And just some basic publishing options that you may have. I'm going to leave the defaults for now. Now, notice on the left-hand side, we're actually within our published data sources area instead of the workbooks area. So now we're talking about grabbing any data source that actually has this approved tag on it. So if you're familiar with tagging, you can tag any object in the system. And in this case, we've got the data sources that feed this particular workbook. We've put a tag of approved. So now, based off of this condition, those data sources will also migrate from source to target. We're going to do the same thing that we did before in the sense that we're putting them within our project with my initials on them. And this is where we're swapping out the connection information to go from the test database to the production database. You notice that we've got a SQL server, we've got our SQL Server network path, and the database name is Dev Superstore World. That's that fictional database of a couple hundred rows with blanket customer information. Well, now we're going to swap it out to say, hey, give us the actual database of Superstore World so that we get real customer names and the full data set behind it. Same thing here. We've got some default publishing options. I'm going to keep them as is. We're going to skip user mapping for now, and if you wanted to, you can certainly run pre and post migration scripts. We don't have any to run right now. And then finally, this is where you would save the plan name. You'd be able to set some additional properties like automatically creating project or destination projects that may not exist, refreshing extracts once the migration completes, and a couple of others. And then finally, we'll run this. And I'll say yes. And this is going to show me the status as well as any sort of output or errors. So we'll let this run momentarily. And I would imagine it shouldn't take long since we're only doing one workbook and I think one data source as well. But I see that it's finished. So now let me go back to my Salesforce, or excuse me, Sales Dashboard Dev folder. Let me just back out of here and see if I can find that that project. I just do a search here. Okay, go back in and let's go into our dashboard. There it is. Looks like it just took a minute for the changes to take effect. I see that I've got my RIL. I'm going to click on monthly review. And if the migration has worked, we should see those 3 changes. I see that the map view is loaded as opposed to the bubble chart. I see that I've got my certified image swapped out, or replacing, I should say, the beta image. And it looks like we've got real data in the database. Those tests are removed, and we actually have individual customer names as opposed to just generic customer 1, customer 2, customer 3. So with that, we'll pivot over to the hands-on exercises, and we'll go from there. Thank you.